we're going to be talking mostly about local content, and we came up with this cheeky title asking if the hype about transcreation is over with. But mostly we're going to be talking about transcreation and, well, actually local content. So producing local content. And all right, so the panelists today, you probably saw it already. We have, starting, I guess, on my screen to the right, we have Fabrizio Cattaneo. He's the Marketing Localization Manager at Stripe. We have Lindsay Zhang, who is the Head of Content Localization at Trip.com. And then we have Paulina Makles, the Managing Director at Creative Tribe. Cool. And all right, and let's go ahead and kick things off then. So like we rehearsed and we kind of jumped straight into local content and whether or not organizations should be doing local content. But I think actually in this one we're going to start just by defining for the audience what is the difference between transcreating and translation and producing local content. So maybe Fabrizio, you want to jump in and tell the audience what we mean by local content versus transcreation.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, I believe that many people in the audience already have somehow an idea about like localization and transcreation and local content. What I feel this panel wants to be about is more to understand how the lines are blurring between these different steps. So while before, I believe the industry has been saying, okay, we stick one-to-one with the source tag. So this is translation, perhaps localization. If we start and be a bit more creative, it becomes transcreation. I believe that the needs now in the industry, in the digital market, start to be more towards about, okay, let's move more and more towards transcreation and perhaps like creating local content where required, rather than just sticking to the English. So basically is how do we talk, and I believe this entire conference is about that, how do we talk to the audience we have in not only in their own language, but in the culture they understand. And to do that, I believe, and that's the approach I'm keeping personally in my career, is like to be more flexible into drawing these lines. I mean, having like localization and transcreation, I think it's more an interaction now rather than an either or kind of situation. And in the same way, I believe that going towards the creation of local content is just the natural evolution of that.
Right on. So I think that's a pretty good introduction to the topic then. So should organizations be creating more local content and moving beyond a source target approach? Lindsay, do you want to jump in?
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Lindsay from Trip.com. So I think, yes, there is a trend to being more and more content creations like in recent years, especially compared to the translations. So because when we can see when we do the translation, it's more translated from the source content. So the quality system or the assessment, it requires you stick to the source. So even when you do the transcreations, so you still need to refer to the source. However, sometimes we will find market. So the content is like a cultural difference. So something like I used to have a case that it works here in Asia, but it never exists in EU. So they don't have this shopping habits. So what we can like overcome this is actually we need to create the content based on the local like shopping preference. So the thing what we do now is more like we work closely with the local offshore marketing team. So especially you need to get the idea about your brand image, especially for that country. So normally for a whole company, we will have a unique brand image. So for instance, for Trip.com, maybe we consider like a smart and witty. So this type of image. However, if you decide to like do some marketing campaigns in Japan, so their culture is extremely like details and polite. So when you do some like a humor, like a joke, so maybe it's not appropriate for local market. So in that case, we more work closely with the offshore marketing team to create the content beyond the image. So beyond the source content, that we create something that more acceptable to local market, and we will run some tests. We will see, okay, how is the data shows if we create the content, or how is it shows when we're doing the translation. So we don't like purely make a judgment based on your feelings. So we will have the test result to show, okay, if we use the created content, or if we use translation, which can bring more traffic, so which can bring more UV or PV from our end. So it turns out there is a trend that create content have better performance in the data. Yeah, that's it.
To add a bit on that, I feel like this change to local content creation is natural, because marketing is ultimately driven by user intent or user expectations. When you have a translation process, or even a transcreation process, that user intent is not considered at the very beginning. And it should be, to create content that is relevant, whether we're talking about online content that is driven by what users are searching for, or whether we're talking about general marketing materials or anything else. So I feel it's natural and easier for companies to go to local content creation, because you have that ultimate customer persona at the very forefront of what you're doing.
Yeah, on building on that, I agree with both Paulina and Lindsay that clearly many companies just need to create more and more local content. I also believe when we talk about global companies, it's important to see the creation of content and the creation of local content, transcreation, localization as basically part of the same activity in, let's say, under, let's say, a localization umbrella, because we do know that now users consume much more content than before, that through digital acceleration, social platform, etc. So the reason is, if we have a certain amount of content already created in a language, it doesn't have to be a source language. It can be any language used by that company. These can be also localized when it's easy to localize. For example, it can be some more straightforward text. It can be transcreated when it's something which has to be adapted to that culture, as Lindsay would say. Or it can be instead that there is a specific need for that country. And that specific need, I think what is important is that specific need can become a global need, because it's a discovery in a country that can be applied to other countries. So I think that really this global approach, rather than a source target, as we have been using for the last years, I think that's like a holistic approach it would be very, very powerful for every company, because I mean, it just allows us to create more content and faster and quicker reach out to a broader audience.
Right on. So, and Paulina, I think your point about user intent, and I think we're kind of passing by the question of metrics too, and measurements in marketing. And so, I guess a good question then is, in your experience, the three of you, have you seen like really hard data that says that local content can outperform translated content in certain contexts? And maybe we jump in with Lindsay.
Yes. Okay. So yes, we do. I think I have a very a recent case about this, is because recently Trip.com just to do a very large campaign in Hong Kong market. So we all know that travel industry was influenced by the pandemic. So it's totally, sometimes we design, we have a marketing campaign, so we more focus on local market. So this time we do a campaign called a buy one, get one free night in Hong Kong market. So the thing is that we don't use like a leverage the source like English into the Hong Kong Chinese, because first there is no similar like events or campaign before, and secondly the idea is brand new. So the thing is that what we do is that we need to create a very attractive content to actually encourage the shoppings or the traffics in Hong Kong market. So we can see after we doing all the content creations, not only about the articles, about the emails or messages or brochures, all this. Also including we do some like videos, we do KOLs, so all this. So we working closely with marketing manager and stick to our brand book to selling the image of trip.com and do some sales for this campaign. So the result turns pretty good, especially about like the download rate or the traffics, the unit visit rate. So it's nearly like a double or tripled compared to the event before. So this is something we think, okay, we cannot just do something like transcreation. So we need to come up with some content that is more attractive. And we found out it's more efficient. So previously we think, oh, will the copywriting take more time? So, or when the content creation take more time because you need to think about the ideas. But it appears it's very quick. So we complete it in a very short turnaround time, and we package everything and we do it. Because for travel industry now, we cannot plan in a very long turnaround time. All these sales is more like a staycations. It's very short turnaround time, because people will they decide to take the holidays, or they decide to go to the hospital like 1 week before. It's not like previously like 3 or 4 months before. So that's something you do like a very fast turnaround time. So we find out, okay, it's not bad. The data shows really good. So we do this trial in Hong Kong market and give us a very good feedback. Yeah. So I hope it helps.
Yeah, no, that's great. So does anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I have an example. It relates to blog content or article content. I've worked with a company based in San Francisco. They made software for increasing work productivity and communication, in short. And when entering Japanese markets, what we found out is that, well, Japanese people aren't really looking for communication tools, or they're not looking to increase work productivity through tools. They were looking for much more advanced things. So things like holograms, for instance. And even though the tool that we worked, or the company that made the tool that we worked with, wasn't really able to do that, but they had to pivot in terms of what they did, what they produced in terms of content. They weren't able to talk about increasing productivity and bettering communication between teams, for instance. They had to focus on more advanced elements, and it worked very well, but it required a really in-depth research into what the market that they were entering required, in fact.
I also have an example of where basically, yeah, transcreation, actually local creation of content drew very good performance. In one of the previous job I had, I was working for an e-commerce platform, and among the countries we were expanding into Europe, not even going to Asia where things are even more different, but to Europe we were expanding into Eastern Europe, in some countries in there. So what we had were just, to name our products into Eastern Europe. So I drove an activity in replacing the translation of the products into an actual research of customers' behavior. So it was focused, of course, on SEO and organic traffic. And we've seen that the kind of work drew about 300% increase in searches and visits on the website, organic searches, not even paid. And that's basically the approach we kept, was rather than saying, okay, this is how we call the product in English, how is it called how do we translate that into the country? We follow basically what also Google does in a certain way. We went for the concept. We didn't say, oh, it has to be, you know, a sneaker, it has to be a tennis shoe. We just said, okay, these are sports shoes. How are sports shoes talked about into these markets? What kind of sports do they use from, or do they call them from? And we found really impressive things, like some concepts simply do not exist in other languages, because especially if these are, you know, day-to-day items, this is something they differ a lot by culture, even when we talk about closer cultures within the same continent. So clearly, what we found and what we used also as a guiding principle for the team afterward was like, we have to talk the language of our users are talking. If we have an item and we just want to force or horseshoe a translation on that, nobody's going to look for that. Nobody's going to use Google to search for it. Hence, we're not going to get the customer anyway. So there is basically just a weight of money into getting that translation. So we spent a little more just to do a proper research around it and to find it from the user perspective. And that really drew a lot of, well, a good return on investment on that one.
Excellent. So I think we've kind of established that in certain circumstances, producing local content is a good idea for marketing teams. And you know, I think it seems pretty obvious to me, at least, that would be the case, and also in my experience as well. So like I guess in terms of the trend, and like at what point in time in the last 10 years did producing local content become more of a thing? And how do you see the trend over that time, and then projecting into like the next 5 years in terms of local content production on marketing teams?
Maybe I'll start on that one. There has been a huge shift in recent 18 months. The spike in, I can even see that, you know, following my website organic traffic, I can see a huge spike in searches for copywriting and copywriting services, whereas transcreation has gone down very much. And I think, well, obviously it's because of the digital shift that companies had to go through to adjust to the new reality. And I think because companies have realized that creating local content might be more cost effective than transcreation, it will grow. Because transcreation has become, it has been a buzzword. It has been a service that has been growing in the past few years. But at some point, and I myself have realized that it might be a kind of a half product, so to say, that it's easier to go to local content creation. It requires less input from the marketing teams. It requires less training, less involvement from marketing teams. It's simply easier and more cost effective. So I assume that we still will be requiring transcreation services, but it will be less and less in favor of original content creation.
Yeah, I agree with Paulina. I had a similar experience. I could see that there is a shift more and more towards creating local content, mainly because beside the cost effectiveness that Paulina mentioned, I'm not going to repeat and quote her, but on top of that, another thing is despite the fact that English literacy is growing throughout the world, at the same time, it sounds like a paradox perhaps, but people are more and more used to see content that they expect to have content not only in their language, that content is relevant to them. So if I talk like on a blog, I talk about a pop star in the US, may not be relevant to somebody in Italy, or may not be as relevant as a local pop star. So at that point, it would become really a big obstacle just to go through some hurdles to try and fit what we have created in English into that. It's just a lot easier to go and, as Paulina says, just create something locally relevant. So fully agree on that.
So I feel, sorry, just one more thing. I feel a bias that transcreation creates when you work with source content, like in the example that Fabrizio mentioned. I've worked with similar content where it was relating to sports that were popular in the US, and the transcreators were biased towards the US culture instead of thinking in their local context. They were struggling to detach from the source, and I feel that this attachment between source and target in transcreations, it exists, and it somehow narrows the view that the transcreators have. It's easier to just start from scratch, being based from very start in your local culture.
Yes, I want to add more is from a different view is that, yes, I think I find out like in the recent 2 or 3 years, we have more requests for content creations. So especially we are OTA company, so it's more related to the performance marketing. It's like you create the content for SEO, tasks. So the things is different scenario because, for instance, when we create the content as like brochures or emails or these things, maybe you need highly focus on the creativity and adoption of the culture for local market. But on the other side, when we do the SEO articles, they actually have the KPIs, like the keywords. So how it shows in the performance marketing results. So this type of things. So when we create the content, we find out there are more and more requests from performance marketing regarding the content creations. And also it appears that the quality and the expectations for this type of content is different from the traditional content creations. And I find the shift is coming out. And also the linguists, the copywriters, and also vendor side, they adapt to this change. So especially we need to design the customized like a process to create the content for SEO related articles. That's also something I think we will pay more and more attention in the future, especially for maybe like IT companies who is looking into the traffics or other data in the future, I think.
Cool. So I think maybe now is a good moment to talk a little bit about how we're producing local content and what some of the organizational strategies are for producing local content. But we do have a question in the Q&A, and I think we should take it from Mariana Alves Pasos. She asks, is it easier for a company to budget for transcreation than for local content creation? And what is the difference in pricing strategies for those models? I think that's a good question to get us kicked off into the world of how we're producing local content. I guess I'll call on somebody. Maybe I call on Fabrizio, just because you're the one next to me.
That's all right. It's so. I think it's a great question, but because well, let's be fair. Of course, copywriter have normally a higher hourly rate than, and again, for copywriting, usually we talk about hourly rate rather than cost per word for obvious reasons. And so normally, if we go for a translation localization, it might cost less. But again, I don't believe that when we're talking about marketing, I don't believe that going for what costs less is always, actually, I don't think it's often not the right solution. This is my personal opinion. People may disagree. But the point is, for marketing, and this is applied to every area of marketing, it can be, performance marketing as well, even more so, to more traditional pieces of marketing, digital marketing. The fact is, it's all about the return on investment. So if, for example, if we set the budget for a translation and then doesn't return any visit, any traffic, any conversion, well, it's wasted money. If we budget something higher, and if we budget, if we go with a higher budget for content creation, and these comes back at 3x, then of course it is what we're looking for. So I guess the answer to, my answer to this question, it's not right about how do we budget for it. It's about let's use the data we have to create to create our budget. So the point is, if we want to achieve our objective, then we use the data that we got from local content performance against, localization. And what I found, for example, in other companies as well, is sometimes for some pieces of content, going for localization is the right choice. For some other pieces of content, going for local content is the better choice. Now, that's the difficulty on when creating the budget, and it's because, and of course, in planning the resources, it's not about do we want to spend more money or less money? It is I believe it's a different kind of conversation. It's more about how do we want to boost performance in those markets, and you do need the local creation and you need the localization as well, because of course you cannot have an army of copywriters for every country at the same time.
Excellent. Cool. So then let's move on then to talk directly about content creation, local content creation strategies. Maybe Paulina, you want to jump in from the provider perspective? Like what are some good strategies for local content creation?
Well, okay, that's a very broad topic, so maybe I'll focus on. So maybe I'll focus on, or maybe I'll just be broad as well. You always start with the user intent. So whether you're talking about digital marketing, you're talking about blogs creation, landing pages, you're talking about Google Ads or anything, you will start with keyword research. And that's because it's largely underestimated in the localization world compared to digital marketing world, how much information there is actually in well-conducted keyword research. It gives you huge insight into what local market is searching for. And when you talk about content creation, you base on what users want. And it's not only, you don't only use those keywords to perform SEO actions. You can use that to get an idea of what the market is expecting as well. What is the intent of your users or your customers, what they're looking for. So that's whatever type of content you want to create, that will be your best starting point, because it will be relevant. It will give you an idea of where to kick off. And then, depending on what you find out and what types of content we're talking, that's more complicated, and I don't want to go into detail, but that baseline is always there. You need to do your research before you start creating content. And I have seen in many companies a huge mistake when it comes to content creation, that instead of solving user problems or trying to answer questions that they have, they boast about the company or about the service. Whereas the way that you convert a visitor to a customer is through nurturing them, through giving answers to their questions, through building a relationship with them, and not through trying to shove your product or your service down their throat in the very first blog that they write.
Excellent.
They read, sorry.
And then Lindsay, from an organizational perspective of an enterprise that's transcreating, translating, localizing, and creating local content in many different languages across the world, you can work with excellent providers like Paulina from Creative Tribe. You also have maybe in-house staff, and so like as an organization. How do you produce the local content at trip.com?
Yes, very good question. So I think it's more related to what Fabrizio mentioned previously. So basically from our enterprise point of view, we will consider many, aspects such as like turnaround time and also the budgeting and also the resource as well. So for instance, we do have certain content you have to doing like translating and transcreations. So when your campaign is centralized, so for instance, it's target for all the market globally. So you only need to do like a minor amendments because it's applied to the global market. So it's much easier. So you will go with translation or transcreation. And also if it's specific for certain markets, so the thing is that we will do the content creations. But also we will go back to check the budget. So to be honest, it's really like a serious topic we need to consider, especially during pandemic. I think maybe it's only for travel industry because we do have some difficulties during the pandemic. So we have to do everything we need to consider the budgeting things. So it's like how much budget we can use on content creations. That's something I think it's definitely taking into account. And also we do working with the in-house team as well as the vendors. So it's down to how we resource team to manage the scalable team for doing all these tasks. So for instance, if we're working with Paulina for copywriting, tasks, so we may build another SOP to say how we communicate vendor and the marketing manager for that market to create the content. So the thing is more balanced between all these factors, like if my budget allows, if my time allows, and if the resource is qualified for this market, then we will do. And on the other side, from the enterprise point of view, we will always tier the market. So that's the thing is that you have a global market. So for instance, your market is like 50 or 60 countries, but you always have the focus market and the second tier market. So what we will do is that maybe for focus market, we will more pay attention to content creation because we know it's bring more traffics when you use this method. But for the second tier, maybe we just go with the transcreation and the translations. So I will say all this factor was more balanced. But the thing is that how you communicate with the different stakeholders and your partners to make sure everyone is on the same page. We work towards the same KPI, same OKR. Then it brings up a very flexible content strategy.
I just want to add one more thing to what Lindsay said. In terms of communication and working towards the same KPIs, it's very important to remember that content strategy is a living thing. It will not stay the same even throughout the year. It will change rapidly as markets change, as expectations change. And this is something that might be sometimes forgotten by companies that have little experience in local content creation or marketing as such. Just have that at the back of your mind that it will never stay the same throughout even a year.
So especially, sorry.
No,
just add more from Paulina. I totally agree with that. So we will find it keep on changing. So the thing is that how do we keep on the same page? So that's I said, communications partnership is really important. Yeah.
So we have a couple of good questions from the audience out there, and I think we should jump on this one too. So Nadia, I'm not going to try your last name, Nadia, because I'm not going to be able to do it, but that's on me. So Nadia asks, as managers, we have loads of tools that helps us manage the localization process. Are there any tools out there that help you manage local content creation process? And I think that's an excellent question.
I can try and give some help there. The fact is, yes, there are good tools to manage local content creation. The fact is, it's basically the same tools that I used to create content creation. We have, there are a number of very good CMS tool. I'm not going to say any name because I don't want to sponsor any of them, but I have some I like more than others. And I believe that any tool that allows for the creation of what's called the headless content is something would work very well, both if you end up wanting to localize in the content for something else, or anytime you want to repurpose content. This goes for local content. That's where I think it's important as a kind of a paradigm shift that we should start to look at is when we talk about a local content creation, why does it has to be considered local? It can be, I mean, at that point, if we have something created in the US, it's like, yeah, it's been the source language, for example, of English for many companies for a long time. If we are creating local content now for all the other countries, well, English at the same time, it just become another content creation part. So, sorry, I just went on a tangent here, but going back, basically, yes, there are good CMSs that allow repository of headless content, and I think these are good ways to start. What I think or at least so far, and if Lindsay and Paulina have found a solution on that, I would be really happy to hear, is I couldn't find any good tool right now that helps on the transcreation one. That's on transcription process. I've seen some TMSs trying that, but I guess maybe because through many years of translation memory, we kind of put ourselves in a corner in having strings that have to match source and target, so you can reuse the translation memory. And now I haven't seen I have seen some attempts from some notable TMSs, but I haven't seen any real game changer there. And that's basically the challenge I would like to throw out in this panel. And why don't we start thinking about how do we manage transcription in a very effective way rather than, and that's probably because I guess the tool, if we use a TMS, we end up, like Paulina said before, perhaps a bit biased toward the source. But again, sorry, I just went out, but this is something that I've been researching for quite some time and I couldn't find a good answer. So I'm just throwing out the challenge if anybody has a good idea there.
Something I've been struggling with for so many years. No, there is none. There is no good tool at least none that I know of, to handle transcreation, especially on a large scale. It has been a challenge. As you mentioned, I've seen some good ones, or some that tried, but they still lack that flexibility that you require to work with transcreation, unfortunately.
Excellent. So, oh, sorry, Lindsay, go ahead.
Yes. So yeah, I think I have the same point. So maybe my case is not widely because we tried some like self-deploy like tools or platforms, but maybe it's more like content creations because we find out when we create the content, we not only care about the text we create. So something that you need to consider like pictures, fonts, so all these things when you create for that local market. So we are trying to do something. It's more like internally, but I'm not sure if like in the standard like industrial level there is a common tool for this type of thing. But what we do is that we try to understand more because it's not purely about the text. It's about everything you created. It's about even, sometimes when we create, we care about how large is the picture on this page. So we just amend the picture size to make sure the page looks pretty. So this is something that we find out we working more closely with UED team or with other team, try to create a web package, content. So that's something we are trying to do. Yeah, hopefully it's well getting better.
Okay, so I think we're going into the Q&A part soon. Kate.
There has been a lot happening on the chat.
Yeah, there's a lot going on over there, but I think we're supposed to take the questions now on, like, people can talk. Like, I know there's some questions in there that I really like too. Also, okay, let's jump in and take one more of those. I'm going to rephrase it, but like from the point of view of a translator, you know, so you're a translator, you're working in marketing, localization, you know, in marketing translations. Like, what do you think the trend has been for linguists in terms of local content creation and translation, and how do you know, translators fit into that? Like, what should translators be doing? Let's put it that way.
So that skill set that is expected from translators has expanded lately. They are expected to. It sort of became a kind of a specialization, in a sense that you can be a medical translator, you can be a patent translator, and that is your focus. When it comes to marketing translators, it has become wider. We expect a lot more from marketing translators than we do from regular folk handling technical content, for instance. Sorry for using regular folk, we're all regular folk, sorry about that. Didn't want to offend anyone. And I feel that it's very hard to find people with a specific skill set, especially when you need someone who is creative, plus has a knowledge of SEO, plus speaks a very weird language that, you know, very little people use. So you know, it always has been in the world of translators. I've been a freelance translator myself. You constantly have to be educating yourself, and you constantly have to be looking for new opportunities, and you have to be able to take that step forward and learn new things. And I think it's the case in any work that you do. If you want to be able to fit into the changing market, you have to somehow challenge yourself and do new stuff.
I think that was an excellent answer. Okay, so Kate, let's do the fun part where we take the questions.
Yeah, sorry guys, I also had some problems with video.
No.
So I changed my notebook. Yes, a quick remind, guys, if you want to ask a live question, raise your hand. So far, I don't see any raised hands. So we can just go through the Q&A, the written questions. Robert, I believe you saw all of them. Q&A, okay. There are a lot of questions in there, and people upvoted for them, so feel free just to choose any of them and ask.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, and then anyone, you can raise your hand at any moment.
Actually,
here,
yeah,
and then you can actually jump in and ask your question.
Let's take this question that has like 15 votes, and then in the meantime, I will look for someone to ask the question live.
Right. Yeah, that is a good question too. So. Estella asks, I would love to hear how you go about finding partners to create local content. We all have translation partners, LSPs we work with, but what about local content creation partners? So how do you find those partners?
Yeah, if I got that, I mean, I can start on this one, perhaps. Well, I guess it depends. The first is a combination. I think it's a combination between finding right copywriters. For example, you might want to have for specific language always a person, because by the way, I have to say that the people in the chat are really raising great topics. I would like to discuss them all. It's just impossible in time, but the point is, I believe it's very, very important to have long-standing partners. So if there are some languages, for example, or some markets that are very important for a company, I strongly suggest to set up a long-term relationship, like with the specific copywriter, so they can be kind of an extended part of the marketing team, and they know exactly, you know, the campaign, the concept, brand, not just hiring somebody to do. Well, even when a brief is available, it's just like one brief out of context. Where is this choice coming from? Where is the brief coming from? Where is this need coming from? So creating a long relationship with the specific freelancer, I think it's a very good first step into this. Then, of course, you might want to create a local content just, ad hoc, or you want to test the local content in your countries. And there are great creative agency in every country. I know that some LSP provide also some, of course, local content, and you might check with your LSP if that's a service. At the same time, there are definitely in every country there are local creative agency, because long story short is marketing doesn't exist only for global companies. I mean, every country has their own specific market that had marketing for as long at least as TV has been there, if not even before that. So definitely there are creative agency that can create the content for you in every country. It's like a local marketing agency. There are even definitely creative agencies as well, or at least this is my experience.
Yes, I think this is a really good question. So basically, what we normally do is that we will starting like consult with the current LSP or current like freelancer or even like in-house team, if you are willing to leverage your capability to copywriting or content creations. So I find out that there is some like leverage between these two type of tasks. But of course, some of the sometimes the translator or the vendor they are not get used to the copywriting things. Then we maybe go with other optional plans. But majority based on my experience, some LSPs and some partners, they do offer the content creation like services. So that's something is that you already build the trust with them. Maybe you already working with them on translation task before, and also it's already complete your procurement process. Especially from enterprise like point of view, when you start working with new vendors, you have to go through a very long process. So that's something I will say is a starting point. We're always checking with the existing resource. And then the backup is that if this is a new product line, or if this is new business, or if we see we need more professional level content creators, then we will go with other choice. So I will say the things is just depends on how your resource pool and how your future target for the whole whole thing, I will say. So is it really important to creative marketing agency? So this.
I have a very strong vested interest in answering that question, but I'll try to somehow pass over the obvious things. I've seen a huge shift in terms of what LSPs are offering, and especially in recent years, they started offering digital marketing or variations of that. And I think it's, in terms of LSPs, it's still something new, because it requires a bit of different expertise, because working with digital marketing, you have to be, your one leg has to be in digital marketing, another one has to be in localization. And I think that doesn't always work, but there are companies that have, that are able to find that, that balance, and being LSPs can offer great marketing expertise. So I do agree with Lindsay. You just need to make sure to double check or triple check that that's something that they are confident to offer.
Sounds like good advice to me, and I'm sure that many LSPs will be listening to this panel and adding a whole section to their webpage about copywriting services. So let's take this question from Daniel Ferry Jones. He asks, and I think this might be interesting: how important is it for a copywriter to have knowledge of the client source language? So like if you're hiring a copywriter in, let's say, Italian, but you work for, okay, Fabrizio is already unmuted, so I'm going to let you jump in.
And I wonder, perhaps it's me not fully understanding the question, but copywriting doesn't need the source language? It's just needs a brief. And of course, if I do take the point that if, for example, I don't know, it's a British company, you might get a brief in English, so you might need, well, of course, you would need the understanding of English to understand the copy, but I don't think that the source language has, I mean, there is no source language in copywriting. I don't know if Paulina, please go ahead.
I mean, there is in a sense that not in translation sense that you have a copy to copy, but you do have to be able to understand the brand's voice, right? And if that brand has only its voice created in Italian, for instance, first that company would have to invest in recreating that voice for English or for German or for any language that they work for copywriting, and only then be able to work with copywriters, because you do need to have that background apart from brief. So you kind of do need to know the source language, but I mean, in the case by case basis. But I feel like it helps. It helps to expand your view a bit, to be able to understand where the company is coming from in the first place.
I think it's a good question, because this is also one of the challenge for me as well. Because for copywriter, especially content creations, so the thing I'm trying to do is that I still want to have everything communicated in English. However, sometimes the source locale is not English. But when you decide to do localization or globalization, you need to make sure you have a common source language, which should be English, because it's easy for different locale or different people to understand your instructions or your styles, so everything. So what we will try to do is that we will make sure all the instructions, style guide, tone of voice, brand image, everything will be maintaining in a common language, let's just say UK English. So that's something don't really like influence the content you created for that locales. So I do have some copywriters command different source capabilities, but as far as I know, there is not huge difference between the content they created, because the requirements from us is that they must create the content for local market. In the other words, they must be specialized in local language. This is more important to me if compared to the source locale. Yeah.
Excellent. So let's take another question here. There's a great question from Marielle Letier, who was at my networking table before the thing. So I'm going to rephrase the question, but first I'm going to read it. She asks, how do you insert the concepts of transcreation, localization, or creating local content to customers whose view is restricted to the concept of quite often literal translation? And so to rephrase that as well, and put it into context of the overall trend of local content creation, like what kind of resistance do you meet from marketing teams when you go to them and say, hey, we need to create local content? Like what is the resistance made of? What's preventing people from just making more local content? Because it seems so obvious. And I'm going to call on somebody then. I got to call on Fabrizio. Because Lindsay and Paulina were talking last.
Okay. Yeah, regarding, I mean, experience the main resistance, I haven't experienced what was the part where the client or the partner was talking to was just looking for a literal translation. So I haven't experienced that, so I don't have any stronger example there. But regarding the resistance I found in in creating local content, or perhaps even localizing, it's more a lack of understanding of a different language and how a language and a culture can be different and why certain things would not work. I mean, these is applied both if we talk about the specific, in a localization text, during the localization of a text, or even when we talk about creating content and something in a brief simply wouldn't work for that. And these difficulties, of course, I have experienced a number of times. I believe everybody has in the industry. And I think it's about kind of, sorry for the pun there, but I think it's about translating it in a way that the other party will understand. For example, I was discussing, it happens sometimes that I was discussing about the website, and let's say, oh, this page is not localized, and I guess anybody understood, well, had the experience of somebody else telling, oh yeah, but in English, anybody can understand English, or it's clear from the images how you should use it. And the point is, what I did is I created a mock-up showing like, okay, you're in an English page and suddenly a Spanish page comes up. How do you feel? And that, I think, it's a sense of relatability. So in my experience, again, going back, is the main difficulties I found, and these didn't happen only in marketing, it happened, for example, in software development, it happened in the operations, I mean, in every area, is if you haven't worked with language, it's difficult to understand how your language wouldn't work as is for another culture. But that's the only extent I had. I didn't have any real strong or very negative response of fixating, or people fixated on literal translation or anything like that. So I didn't experience that.
Oh, I would like to get your perspective, Paulina, but I think we're out of time. I would like to know, like, when the client goes to you and they say, oh, hey, can you translate this marketing content? And then you turn around to them and you say, well, I can also, offer local content. Like, what's the barrier to resistance you meet there, and how do you go about explaining local content in 30 seconds or less?
It's usually money. Most of the time it's money. And usually I try to reverse the situation. Hey, you wouldn't go to your native market, to an English-speaking market, and sell them crap copy, would you? So why do you want to do that for the German market? Or why do you want to do that for Japanese market? And that usually works. Just shifting the view. Hey, you wouldn't do that in your market. Why do you want to do that for any other market? It won't work. So yeah, that's usually one of the arguments that, better said, of course.
It's a perfect answer.
Sorry, but we actually have to wrap up. But we have one question live from the person, from Anna Lydia. So I'm just adding her to the stage, and let it be the last question that we will answer. Anna Lydia, you are with us. You can turn on your video, microphone. Can we see you? Well, seems like for some reason, no. Okay. Okay. So then we have time for one more question from the written box. So if you choose the last one, Robert.
Okay. Let's choose something juicy. So let's get. Well, let's see here. Maybe. Well, I guess I have a question. Maybe we kind of. Sorry, Kate. Do you have a?
No.
Okay. Right. So we kind of skipped over the stuff about metrics and KPIs, and we like talked about KPIs in passing and stuff. But what is the relationship between Marketing Loc and KPIs that come from the marketing team, and how closely do you work with the marketing team with these KPIs? And let's call on Lindsay. Yeah.
Okay. I think this is very, interesting question, because yes, we do, especially for like content team or localization team. So the thing is that you need to show your efforts. So how can we assess your efforts is the KPIs or OKRs. So especially the marketing performance. So yes, definitely. I think for all the content or localization department in the organization, they will link their KPIs with marketing KPIs. And these two teams work quite closely. And also, I think I will use Paulina's point of view is that this kind of KPI will have changing a lot within some short periods, maybe like 3 months, maybe like 6 months, because you have a very quick feedback about the things you did for marketing. So you can immediately see, okay, how is the traffic performance? How about everything else? But on the other side, the thing is that we all working towards the same goal. However, the KPI cannot be completed by your team only. So that's something I think everyone in the organization, we will feel that, okay, sometimes it's just based on the market performance or based on the all team efforts. It's not only content team or localization team. So it's something I think when we design this KPI and OKR, you and the marketing team should sit down and discuss about this in detail. It's like something that we can set the steps. So these things that what we're gonna do, what marketing gonna do. So we have milestones and we do reviews, progressively. So you cannot just do things like every 3 months or every 6 months. You say, okay, we have one-time review. No, you need to keep closely with the marketing team and get the result from them. So that's why you can adjust your plan about the content creation or content localizations to make sure your final target is met. So that's something I will say team efforts plus some luckiness. All in all. Yeah.
Well, you want to tell this question? Yeah?
No, it's fine. I think we're running out of time, so that's good.
Yeah, a little bit. Yes, I gave you additional time because we started later than it was scheduled. So, yeah, thank you so much for your time for discussion. We'll have a lot of questions actually left. I think we will transfer them to some discussions, maybe on LinkedIn, for example. Thank you so much. I hope you will stay with us and for networking, which is upcoming, and for the other talks. Thank you, and bye-bye. See you maybe next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Best panel in the event.